Representative Melin, House File 1646. Thank you very much. Apologize for the delay. The chair will move House File 1646 to be before the committee for possible inclusion in the division report. Representative Melin, do you have the A01 amendment?
I do, Mr. Chair, and that is a delete all amendment, so I'd appreciate if you could move that as well.
All right. The chair moves the JMA01 amendment to be before the committee. This is the author's amendment to get the bill in the form that she wishes. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Representative Melin, to your bill as amended, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for hearing House File 1646 this evening. And I'll just go through the bill briefly. I have with me Ron Dicklitch, who's the Executive Director of Range Association of Municipalities and Schools, who's mostly here just to answer any questions that members might have. The first section of the bill is actually the METSA bill that you heard yesterday. So I won't go through that again. The section 2 of the bill pays for the METSA bill. And actually, I'll just start out with talking about the taconite production tax a little bit, so members are just familiar with what we're talking about here. There's no general fund impact to my bill. The mining companies on the range pay a taconite production tax in lieu of property taxes. They don't pay any property taxes. They pay the taconite production tax. And there's a pretty specific formula that that money goes into, and then it is distributed through the formula. So this bill is sort of moving around some of the funds within the taconite production tax formula. Section 3, members, has to do with the Taconite Economic Development Fund. That fund was first set up in the 1990s and was only 10 cents per ton. It was then changed to 30.1 cents per ton. And essentially what it is a tax rebate to the mining companies for capital improvements within the plant or mine. And so we give them essentially property tax rebate every year through the IRRB. That's about $12 million to do capital improvements at the mine. What this bill does is reduces the 30.1 cents per ton that they're currently getting to 20.4 cents per ton. It then takes that extra 10 cents per ton and dedicates it to school bonding projects. So the IRRB would instead use that money to issue a bond, and schools throughout the Iron Range would be able to do bonding projects so that they can have capital investments and improvements at the schools. Basically, right now, members, everybody else's property taxes are going up, including businesses and homeowners. And that's not currently the case on the range with the mining companies. Historically, I've had House Research put a spreadsheet together for me about historically the taxes that the mining companies pay. They pay a cents per ton. It's not a percentage of income or a percentage of what they sell a ton of ore for. Historically, the taconite production tax rate relative to the price of ore, meaning what they're selling a ton of ore for, has been around 6.1%. It's currently 2.4%. So they are selling ore sometimes 300% higher than what they've sold it for in the last 20 years, yet their taconite production tax has gone down, the impact of the taconite production tax has decreased by 55%. Just looking at the numbers, I think that it's reasonable at this time to invest in our schools throughout the district and to make sure that they have proper capital improvements by reducing that tax rebate that goes to the mining companies. I can't think of any other industry, I guess, throughout the state that's getting a multi-million-dollar tax rebate for making capital improvements within their facility that they would need to be making anyways. Section 4 of the bill has unspecified dedications to the city of Hibbing and to the city of Mountain Iron. And these are costs that have been incurred as a result of mining. We are trying to get the company, especially in the case of Hibbing, to pay for some of these costs. Just to give members an idea, right now the city of Hibbing, 4 years from now, will only have enough water for 20% of the population. We're probably going to run out of, we won't have enough water by this summer for all of the population of the city, and that's because Hibbing Taconite, because of their mining operations, have drained the Scranton well, which was one of the biggest providers of water to our city. Because of that, the city has located another well in a different aquifer that they will have to drill so that they have enough water for the city. So what we're doing right now is trying to get the company to contribute to that well so that it's not on the taxpayers of the city of Hibbing. But there is an undedicated amount in this bill, and the money would come from reserves that we have in the homestead property tax credit, so that there wouldn't be direct property tax increases for the homeowners and business owners of Hibbing who are having to deal with basically spending millions of dollars to drill a new well because Hibbing Taconite has drained the Scranton well. There's also an undedicated amount to the city of Mountain Iron for the cost of moving utilities as a result of U.S. Steel expanding. And again, we're still in the process of meeting with the city to see exactly what their financial amount or financial requirements will be. Section 5 of the bill is just the language that I've already talked about, where the IRRB would issue a bond for the schools. And again, that money comes from the 10 cents per ton that's currently going as a tax rebate to the mining companies. And I think that sums up the bill, unless you have anything. And so then we would stand for questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Representative Melin. Representative Melin, if not for the language on 421 and 422 of the DE amendment, the unspecified revenues to the city of Hibbing and the city of Mountain Iron, how would those local governments pay for, things related to the water supply in Hibbing and things related to utilities in Mountain Iron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, basically, utility rates would probably go up quite significantly in order to pay for a new well. Like I said, they're actually having to locate the well about 6 miles from where the city actually is, because they had to find another aquifer because Hibbing Taconite drained the aquifer that the city was getting their water from. And so they have to locate the new well about 6 miles outside of the city and then build the infrastructure in order to get the water to the city. And so it is going to be a substantial cost. So in Hibbing, we have a municipal utility source. So I would bet that our rates would go up pretty high in order to pay for that new well.
All right. Thank you. Questions from members? Representative Hertas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Melin, I think in your introduction you referred to the discount of the production tax as a property tax refund, and I think you meant to call that something else. Is that correct?
Representative Melin.
Mr. Chair and Representative, no, not really, because they don't pay a property tax. They pay a taconite production tax in lieu of a property tax. So it is their property tax equivalent. So essentially, it's a property tax rebate.
Representative Hertas.
Okay, I don't want to split hairs. I just thought for the record you'd want to be clear about that because it is a production tax credit, not a property tax credit.
Representative Melin.
Mr. Chair and Representative, it's the taconite production tax that they pay in lieu of property taxes. So if you don't want to use the term property tax rebate, you could use the term production tax rebate.
Okay.
Representative Hertas.
You spoke a little bit to the revenues, and we don't have that information or chart, but has the mining operation, it seems my recollection of the taconite and iron ore industry as a boy growing up, it kind of peaked and then it kind of died and it kind of revived itself. And just tell me a little bit about, has the production actually been increasing recently? Has the revenues been going up because of increased demand? Have they found new technologies on how to reclaim some of the lower grade ore? I mean, is that actually working and helping for the area?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative. Yes, we had, having lived on the Iron Range my whole life, I'm very used to the ups and downs of the industry. A few years ago, it was pretty hard times. Production had dropped significantly. We're back up to full production, around 38 million tons a year. And what you're referring to is Scram Mining. Probably the most recognizable company would be Magnetation. And what they do is process the old tailings pile. And because of technology created at the University of Minnesota through research, they're able to extract ore in what we thought before was just waste, basically. And so, yes, there have been job benefits to the region because of that. If you look at what the mining companies are paying in an occupation tax right now, which is their equivalent of the corporate income tax. Mining companies also don't pay the corporate income tax. They pay what's called an occupation tax. And if you look at those numbers, they've gone up significantly over the past couple of years. And that is tied to the income that they're making in Minnesota.
Representative Hertas.
Representative Melin, Mr. Chair, thank you for that clarification. So it sounds like during the most recent times, the revenue stream in terms of production tax and the occupation tax has been going up.
Representative Melin.
Mr. Chair and Representative, we do 3-year averaging with our revenue because of the boom and bust nature of the industry. And like I said, we recently had a big bust in 2008, 2009, and we're coming out of that. And so the revenues have gone up because we're currently coming out of that 3-year cycle, which was very, very low revenues. I'd also note that the Taconite Economic Development Fund doesn't get paid to the mining companies if their production falls below 30 million tons a year. So right now we're hovering at around 38 million tons a year. I would bet that that's what we're going to stick with for a while. I hope it doesn't fall below that. But if it does fall below 30 million tons a year, then the companies don't get the Taconite Economic Development Fund money.
Representative Hertas.
Thank you for that clarification.
All right. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Representative Melin or for staff, what is 126C55 and subdivision 3 of Section 5 of the bill. I'm looking specifically at lines 16 and 17. It says the IRRR, it's a district for purposes of Minnesota statutes under 126C.55.
Mr. Chair, I don't have the statute book in front of me, so maybe staff can answer, but isn't it?
The cavalry. Mr. Michaels? Since you probably wrote this?
126C.55, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. If you can help us with Representative Garofalo's question. Can you identify yourself for the tape? Sorry.
Mr. Chair, Joel Michael from House Research. Steve, I think, is looking this up, but basically what, and I don't, because this is a school finance statute, I don't have, but it refers to essentially what's going on here is the commissioner of the IRRR is issuing bonds, and basically what this is saying is that for purposes of the state credit enhancement program that applies to school districts, what we're going to do is to treat the bonds that were issued by the commissioner on behalf of the range school districts as if the commissioner were a school district for purposes of that credit enhancement program, which I suspect this is one of these questions that Representative Garofalo is asking because he knows the answer.
No. I don't want to. I want to be respectful.
Representative Garofalo.
I saw 126C. I know what 126C is. I didn't know what .55 was,
Right.
And I was just concerned and alarmed whenever I see the IRRB inserting itself into the school portion. It just while you're up there, just a quick question, because I don't know if staff knows. For purposes of debt service equalization, would this be factored into their calculation of property wealth or their ability? Because right now there are certain loans that are out there that we're making payments on. Will this be factored into their wealth, or is this just going to be we're going to pretend that it's not taking place?
Mr. Michaels.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Garofalo, now you try to drag me into the school finance world. I'm not going.
That's why I left. I don't. It's like Lord of the Rings. I don't want to go back either. Trust me.
But what this does is it just authorizes the IRRB to issue bonds on behalf of school districts for capital projects. And my assumption is that all of the school finance calculations would go on for their other debt as is. And this will reduce their need for regular debt because they can provide some of their capital facilities through this program, but it doesn't affect how much they're levying to pay if they have other bonds and how much aid they would get under the equalization formula. So basically, I guess you could say that because they're not levying for this, they have more capacity and so they will get less equalization. But you should ask Tim Strom that question.
Well,
Representative Melin.
Mr. Chair and Representative Garofalo, the reason I am happy that you brought that up is because mining companies, because they don't pay property taxes, they don't help paying on referendums for school construction, whereas every other business and homeowner in town does. So that's one of the benefits that they have right now for not paying property taxes is they don't pay on school construction referendums.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Garofalo.
First of all, let me do my best Ron Abrams impersonation.
That's not bad. That's not bad.
So I want to be respectful. I know we're in the tax committee, but you are correct, Representative Melin, but for purposes of determining property wealth, that's not part of the adjusted net tax capacity formula. So it gives districts they are property poor. And so if we're going to be tapping into that revenue stream to provide for this, I want members of the committees, particularly those who are not from the range, to know what's going on the education side of things here. That Representative Melin is exactly right. That those are not considered for purposes of tax capacity. They don't pay them. But the flip side to that is they qualify for aid from the state. And so if you're going to be tapping into that as a revenue stream, then that should be a calculation of what their wealth is. And I just would want that noted. And I don't know if anyone cares or not, but it's just an important fact to know. for purposes of equalization.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Chair Davnie. May I ask Representative Garofalo to yield?
Certainly. We don't normally do that in committee, but go right ahead.
Representative Garofalo, did we ever have a spreadsheet that showed what these individual districts received in their taconite aid, and then anything that would be subsequently awarded to them because of this industry?
Well,
Representative Garofalo.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Erickson, no, because it's not a general education funding source. But I would, since we're, I used to chair the Education Finance Committee, and
So now you're moving to impressions of...
that's me. But no, I think it's just important to understand that mechanism. I wasn't trying to be critical of the idea, or not just people need to understand that if we're going to be, the calculations we use to determine whether a district is property poor for purposes of referendum and for purposes of bonding, whether it's tax capacity or referendum market value, do not include the taconite provisions that Representative Melin is counting on. But if we're going to be directing that revenue to the school districts, and this is a local revenue source, that's what it is, it's in lieu of property taxes, then members on both sides of the aisle should be aware that is taking place. The majority party can decide whether that's fair or not. That's up to them. But I just think it's part of the equation that people need to realize is that this is not just sometimes we just kind of cut off the iron range and say it's your money, you guys do what you want, spend how you want. That's what happened in 2007 when they took money out from the schools up there, distributed it to cities, and it resulted in the state of Minnesota basically it took education dollars and provided local government aid grants to cities up there, because people didn't understand the interactions of what were going on. And I just, for members of the the majority party, just keep an eye on this and watch it, because there are interactions that are not readily apparent.
Representative Erickson.
And Mr. Chair and committee, I'm just curious to see how their aid from this program compares to the rest of our school districts. So maybe I'll pursue getting from the school districts those amounts. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just...
Representative Garofalo.
Representative Erickson, I'll help you if you want to make your argument, you should just look at the Education Omnibus Bill of 2011, because the Iron Range school districts, particularly those under 1,000, got some of the largest per pupil funding increases in the state. So that's a much better argument than the taconite tax, because no one understands it.
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Melin, I see there are a number of blank items in this bill. When will those numbers be filled in?
Representative Melin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Torkelson. This bill is a work in progress. We're still meeting with the cities and the companies to see what the actual needs are for the cost of the well in Hibbing and for the cost of moving utilities in Mountain Iron because due to U.S. Steel operations.
Representative Torkelson.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And the blank appropriation in relation to the revenue bonds?
Mr. Chair, Representative, same thing. We're waiting to see what the size of the bond issued would be relative to the revenue and the needs of the school districts.
The division report will be marked up April 3rd, is it? 3rd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Melin, do you have any knowledge of the history of the Taconite Economic Development Fund and why it was set up?
Representative Melin.
Yes, Mr. Chair and Representative Torkelson, I do. It was set up in the early 90s, and like I said, it was only 10.4 cents per taxable ton at that time. It has increased in 2002. They increased it to 30.1 cents per ton. There have been times when we didn't do the Taconite Economic Development Fund because production fell below the 30 million tons. But it was set up, at the time it was set up, it was because I believe that there were capital improvements that needed to be made that the companies weren't making. So it was set up to give them money to do so.
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when this fund was set up, was it envisioned to do anything besides capital improvements for the mines?
Representative Melin.
Mr. Chair and Representative, no. The default is, so the money goes to the Taconite Economic Development Fund, and then we distribute it at the IRRB. If for some reason we weren't to distribute it, the fallback is the revenue goes to the Doug Johnson Fund and the Environmental Protection Fund, which is essentially our public works fund. There was a time 2 years ago, actually after the homestead tax credit was eliminated, that we withheld some of the TEDF payments to the mining companies and instead did public works projects on the Iron Range that needed to get done. So if we don't give the rebate to the mining companies, the default is the DJJ fund or the Environmental Protection Fund.
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm hoping that we'll have a chance to hear from the industry.
Is there anyone from the industry present who wishes to testify? There is. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
My name is Craig Pagel. I'm the president of the Iron Mining Association of Minnesota. First, I want to thank the representative. The amendment looks a lot cleaner than the original bill, and I understand they've made some changes. It would still result in about a $4 million reduction in what can be used for the Taconite Economic Development Fund by the mining companies. And we are at a time when things are looking a lot better from when this was originally brought in. The business plans of the mines are different. Most notably are the mines that are vertically integrated. So the iron ore that they have goes directly to their steel plant. It's kind of like a farmer having in his own seed. However, there are times yet when we do hit some very lean times based on the economy. Like any large industry, we have our ups and downs with what's going on with the economy. We did see that in 2009, and there was a time when we didn't receive the TEDF, and there was another time that we didn't receive all the amounts. What I'm wondering is, I have some ideas that I'd like to talk to the representative, the author, about that. I think we could almost do the very same thing that she's trying to do, which I applaud. We do need more in our schools. We've been working very closely with the range delegation, but I think there might be some ways that we still can protect those times when maybe it gets lean for the mines. And what they do with it is, so you have a little more understanding, that if there's capital items, what we can do is leverage corporate dollars that we probably would not get, and those projects would not be done in the lean times. It was something that was worked out with the range delegation back in the early 90s, and they've been working on ever since. So it's for many years, it's kind of been a work in progress. So I guess at this time, rather than going through possibility of what could be done, I'd be willing to keep working with the representative. I applaud what they're trying to do with the schools. They've been great schools, and they continue to be. But like all schools right now, they need some help as well. There might be another way we can do it and still have the same benefit.
All right. Any further questions? Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to testify regarding House File 1646? Good evening, sir. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Bob Taman from Sudan, Minnesota, home of the first iron mine in Minnesota. I worked in several of the mines, and I didn't intend to testify until I heard some of the comments made, and it seems we've been discussing mining taconite taxes and education funding, probably two of the most complicated subjects we could have picked on to talk about at the same time. And I'm not sure if I'm understanding the discussion correctly. It seems to be people perhaps think that we're getting a special deal as residents of northern Minnesota with funding of our schools. And I'd like to point out first that a little less than 2 years ago, our high school closed. Tower Sudan High School closed. And I'd like to point out that we vote for referendums to raise our taxes. We make sacrifices for our kids. And then I would close by mentioning a study that came out a few weeks ago from the University of Minnesota in Duluth. That study examined the job creation. And of course, being I worked in the mines and occasionally come down to the cities to work with the boom and bust in mining, I thought I had a good understanding of the economics of mining. But that report was a little bit of an eye-opener in that it said that the mining industry creates more jobs in the metro area than it does on the Arrowhead in Minnesota. It creates more jobs in Minneapolis and Saint Paul than it does in Virginia and Hibbing. So I would suggest that people who believe that somehow we're taking advantage of the system are mistaken. Now, I'm not a big advocate of mining for community development. I don't think it works anymore. They don't hire enough people to sustain our communities. But the Iron Range of Minnesota is not taking advantage of the rest of the state, and I would thank you for your support. I know that the headwaters of the Mississippi are right near Hibbing, and we know that water runs downhill from Hibbing to Saint Paul, and I'd like to see some money run uphill from Saint Paul to Hibbing. So help that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taman, very much.
Champion Doug Johnson.
Representative Melin, any closing comments that can top his?
Well, Mr. Chair, I don't think I could ever top Bob. That was nice. I actually didn't know he was going to be here today, so I thank him for those comments. But just so members are aware, and I think he summed it up, the best. If any of you think that we have a big windfall from the mining industry on the Iron Range, in our communities, in our towns, in our schools, I would invite you to come up. Come up next week over the Easter break. I will take you around to our schools. Our schools are very old. In Hibbing, our school was built in 1919. Virginia around 1910. Chisholm 1924. Nashwauk 1918. These are some schools with some serious needs. Even if you're talking about technology upgrades, in Hibbing High School, for example, which is 7th through 12th grade now, the walls are all concrete. They can't just put wireless in the school, not like they do here in the new schools where they can put wireless throughout the school. There are major infrastructure changes that have to take place when all the walls are concrete. Very costly. Our schools are very old. Our education, and I have a lot of pride in where I came from. I graduated from Hibbing High School, and I think I turned out okay. I don't know, some of the Republicans might disagree, but we do have some major education needs in our communities. We don't have a big windfall from the mining companies. So if you want to tour our schools and our towns, I'd be happy to take you there. So that's an open invitation to committee members, Mr. Chair.
Representative Mahoney.
I just want the committee to understand that your predecessor, well, not your predecessor, but one of the previous Iron Range members, Tommy Rukavina, used that ruse on me and got me to tour Hibbing High School and a variety of others, and absolutely delightful high school, and you're correct. You turned out perfect.
Thank you. I didn't pay him to say that.
No.
What I need later.
Yeah, exactly. There was a trade-off there somewhere. All right. With that, the chair renews his motion that House File 1646, as amended, be laid over for possible inclusion in the division report. Representative Melin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Representative Allen. Representative Faust, would you like to move House File 1635 be before the committee for possible inclusion in the division report?
Yes, I would, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Representative Allen, good evening. Welcome. Thank you. To your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House File 1635, this bill raises two issues. I think it's intended to, because it'll be laid over, intended to open a door here for further analysis, further work. And I have discussed this bill and heard the concerns and with the assessors, the Hennepin County, the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers. And so this bill raises two issues. The first is whether the current tax results for Class 4D property is not sufficient and needs adjustment. And so this bill was brought, obviously, by those who believe that the tax results do need adjustment. And so the second issue is whether that adjustment should be made to the valuation method as proposed by the language in this bill, or by adjusting the classification rate, which I believe was the last adjustment was made in, I think it was 2005. It went from, for 4D, it went from 1.25 to 0.75. And so those are the two issues. And so this bill, it changes the valuation method by limiting the market value and taxable value to a value that may not exceed 100,000 times the number of dwelling units. And again, 4D is the low-income housing, which is Section 8. Those receiving certain federal tax credits, and then others that are all under sort of rental assistance and rent and income-restricted property. So, do we have a testifier here?
I know that there is one in opposition, if I can find my notes. Mr. Heidelberger? Did I get that right? Yes. Very good. Mr. Heidelberger, welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Reed Heidelberger. I'm the city assessor for the city of Alexandria, appearing before you tonight on behalf of the Minnesota Association of Assessing Officers. As Representative Allen said, we did get a chance to talk a little bit about this bill. I certainly appreciate that opportunity. And yes, the assessing community does have some concerns about using market value limitations as a method of aiding the subsidized housing. We would suggest respectfully that perhaps looking at the class rate would be a better way to go. That has been done in the past, as Representative Allen mentioned. We feel that any time you place limits on the assessor's market value, it tends to make the system, the property tax system, more complicated, more difficult to explain to property tax payers, and the class rate option might be a better rate to go.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Heidelberger, is this necessary to change in state law, or can this adjustment be made through the Department of Revenue?
Mr. Chair, Representative Erickson.
Mr. Heidelberger.
To change the class rate, it would have to be changed in statute. It's currently set in statute at 0.75%.
Representative Allen.
And it's set in statutory section 273.13, subdivision 25. So it would be for the 4A property and 4D property and subdivision 25, section E.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Mr. Heidelberger, would this be setting a precedent if this action were taken to, it sounds like in my notes, this is for one Section 8 piece of housing, probably located in Minneapolis. I'm not sure, but I'm guessing it might be. Wouldn't this be setting a precedent for all other housing that falls under that?
Mr. Heidelberger.
I would defer to Representative Allen.
Representative Allen.
Mr. Chair, it's intended to apply to all 4D properties, and then there's a clause that it will take into consideration 4A property in the subsequent years.
Mr. Heidelberger, what happens when an assessor assesses the value of a limited a property where the rent is limited by federal tax credits that were used in the financing of the construction, and they assess it at a value above what the rent that can be charged on that property?
Mr. Chair, currently the statute for 4D properties requires assessors to assess 4D properties like all other properties using the same methodology. If we would get to a situation where that property, where the assessed value was higher than the construction costs, that is something certainly that a property taxpayer, the property owner, could bring to our attention. We could look at those figures, but we are required by statute to assess those properties the same as all other properties.
So, Mr. Heidelberger, the fact that the property can't be used, could not be sold for general purposes because of the tax credits that were used, the rent is limited, doesn't come into the computation. Is that correct?
No, Mr. Chairman, we're assessing it, again, the same as any other rental property. We're looking at market rate rents that would be charged in the area. We're looking at sales of comparable properties, looking at the cost of construction of that property, same as we would for any other rental properties.
Mr. Heidelberger, is it appropriate to use market rate rents as a measure when market rate rents aren't able to be charged in a 4D property?
Mr. Chair, when we're trying to arrive at a market value for the property, yes, we'd be looking at the market rents for that property, assuming that if the property came on the market, it would be a possibility it would no longer be in the 4D program. It could be market rate housing at that time. An owner can withdraw properties from the 4D program as well. So, yes, we're using market rate rents to evaluate those properties.
Thank you. Mr. Michael? I'm sorry. You do property tax, right? You don't do school funding, but you do property taxes? I don't know if you're the best person. I'm in the deep end of the pool, for me, on understanding the federal tax credits that I think can be used to construct these properties and what that means for rents that can be charged, resaleability, things like that. Can you shed any light? Or is there another staff member who would be, another staff member would be a better source?
Mr. Chairman, Joel Michael from House Research again. The federal tax credit programs, along with some other programs that end up financing these low-income projects, frequently contain a contract that requires them to rent units to individuals who have qualifying income and to charge no more rent than a specified level that's set by HUD, called fair market rents. And so contractually, for a period of time, I'm not sure what usually the periods are, 15, 20, or 30 years, they're obligated to essentially live by that contract that was part of qualifying for tax credits. And so they cannot, for those units that are the qualifying units, charge more than that rent. The assessors, though, under their normal methods, do not take those contracts into account. They assess, and they're better at telling you about this on a fee simple basis, where they look at what would this property be worth without regard to the contractual restrictions that apply to it. And I think the analogy they might provide to you is if the owner of a rental property or an office building or something like that makes a poor economic decision and enters into a disadvantageous 20 or 30-year lease, for example, with a tenant that's locked that owner into rent that's lower than what the current market rent is, and they can't get out of that lease, and anybody who buys that building will also get it subject to that lease. They don't adjust the value of the building, the value of the property for that, and I think they would say they would treat these tax credit restrictions in the sort of the same, consistently in that same way. The difference is that they're imposed by the United States government pursuant to the federal tax law and HUD financing and so on, but I think they're better at explaining this than I am, but I think that's the nub of the issue that's involved here, that the value that's on this property, doesn't reflect the fact that they can't charge rents that enable them to recover, what other landlords in the same vicinity would be able to charge.
Mr. Michael, I assume that these tax credits are used in financing the construction. Are there instances, and maybe you're the person in the room and maybe someone else is, where they would be used for a remodeling or something, or would we only see this with the construction of new property?
Mr. Chair, these tax credits can be used for I think what's called substantial rehabilitation. So sometimes you will have a developer come in with, an existing building that they're going to, substantially fix up so that it's available for rental. That's a very common situation.
Thank you. Mr. Hagan, do you want in on this? Please. Mr. Hagan, welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Mr. Chair, thank you. My name is John Hagan. I'm the director of the Property Tax Division. And I'd like to give a little background on 4D and how we got where we are. For a number of years before the legislature made a lot of changes to simplify it, it was an incredibly arduous process to try to value the 4D properties. MHFA had to certify values and amounts to the assessors, and it was really, really complicated and extremely complex. Over a period of years, we working with MHFA and legislators, we found a way to reduce the complexity of it a great deal by valuing it at like other market value apartments and reducing the class rate to where market value apartments pay a class rate of 1.25. 4D properties pay a class rate of 0.65. So that's sort of the history. That's sort of how we got there. As far as the issue before you, we do recognize there's a problem. We've met with people who have informed us that a lot of times some of these properties are built based on an expectation that the tax will not exceed $900. So to cash flow the subsidized housing, they expect a tax of about $900 per unit. In some instances, because of escalating values, the taxes are exceeding $1,800, so twice what they were actually predicting and projecting. So it's putting them in kind of a financial crisis to try to sustain the existence of these 4D properties. And certainly, Representative Allen has a solution that is an interesting solution. We're a little concerned about a statewide class rate that would affect properties throughout the state because you'd have the corresponding tax shifts onto all other properties if the class rate was reduced again. So you sort of have the issue of, do you want to try to deal with some individual properties, and I think Representative Allen's solution is reasonable, to cap the properties at $100,000, which would not affect a lot of properties. The trade-off is it does add another tier of complexity, but if you were to reduce the class rate in all 4D property, there would be tax shifts throughout the state, and properties that were not having any problems cash flowing would see the tax benefits at the expense of all other taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Hagan. Representative Representative Runbeck, you've been patient. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
All right, Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just reinforce what you heard from the assessor. You know, in the regulations in banking and mortgage and finance, as well as appraisal, there are uniform standards that have to be applied in terms of providing the financing. The banking and the lending and the federal guarantees and mortgage insurance want to ensure that there's good market rate appraisals so that they understand, you know, what the loan-to-value ratios are and that the financing is being properly applied. And with that, when appraisers look at property, there's three approaches that they can take to determining value. One is the market value, second is the income approach, and the third is the cost approach. Now, what we're seeing over time is that both, even though we've seen a bubble in the housing industry, there's actually been a rise in the values of multifamily dwellings and apartments because of an increased demand for rental property as a result of the housing bubble. We've also seen that costs haven't continued to decline, and from an income approach, that is really a factor of what would that property be able to produce in terms of total income in an uninhibited market, you know, one that wouldn't be subsidized. So I think it's kind of a dangerous precedent to go down the road that we are. It really sounds like we're now creating a 56th classification of property, but it might be a more appropriate way in terms of defining what is, you know, public housing or tax-exempt housing or something like that. But I think the ratio, you know, of how you apply the tax rate to that property value is really at issue here in terms of what the goal is. But I don't think we should be tinkering with obfuscating values, because the industry needs to use those values to make good market comparables for other types of housing that need financing. And if you are creating a subordinate market by undervaluing properties, you're depressing in the market approach, the value of property that you can use as good comparables to obtain financing to provide what is our end goal, is to provide more housing. So those are my comments that I would add to that.
Well, the chair's question, though, is under Representative Allen's bill, you're getting a more accurate representation of the value of the property than the current process yielded, because the property cannot be sold for the value that
But that's irrelevant, is what I'm saying. The property still needs to be appraised and valued at its current market conditions, regardless of what the subsidies are or whatever. That is a uniform application of what the assessor's task is and what appraiser's task are, is to treat all properties the same. They make comparable adjustments accordingly based on, what the differences are. But, I think it's a dangerous precedent to be going down.
All right. Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Allen, do you have any idea how many properties would be affected by this change?
500.
Representative Allen.
Oh, did I miss
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. That is something that Hennepin County will be taking a look at.
Apparently, it's in the note.
533.
No.
And how big a decrease in value is involved? Is that in that sheet also? How big a decrease is involved in these properties in decrease in value?
Representative Allen.
Mr. Chair, I don't know that number. I haven't seen that report.
So just to clarify the reference, there's 533 apartment properties that have a per unit average market value greater than $100,000. What we don't know is how many of those this bill would apply to, because this bill only applies to 4D properties with that value. So we've got a universe of 533 and a specific number of we don't know yet.
And we don't know how big the decrease would be either.
That appears to be correct as well.
Thank you.
Ms. Van Mosch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Susan Van Mosch with the Department of Revenue. We are working with the department, or with Minnesota Housing Finance, to use their information to identify the number of 4D properties that would be affected by this proposal. So typically, if we have a revenue estimate like we do here with an unknown, in this situation, we just don't have the information we need right now to do that assessment, but we're hoping that in working with Housing Finance, we'll be able to refine the estimate and actually answer the question from Representative Torkelson.
All right. Thank you very much. With that, Representative Allen, any closing comments?
No, I would just add, Mr. Chair, that I think we've identified the relevant issues here is whether you were talking about using some sort of restricted income approach that really accurately reflects that the actual expenses and the restricted rents here, that the market value really, how it really doesn't, I mean, I know that it may serve a useful purpose, but the rate reduction, it just seems that if we could come up with some way that could take into account the actual reality of what it's like for these properties to operate under these restricted rents and the expenses. So.
All right. Thank you very much. With that, the chair renews his motion that House File 1635 be held over for possible inclusion in the omnibus report. Thank you, Representative Allen. Well, because I probably let her do that.
Not here, though.
I know, but we're going to go get her. I'll do my bill.
Oh, do you have another?
I've got
more.
Yeah, sorry. But if you work with me here, mine can be brief.
Oh, seriously.
Do you mind?
No, not at all. The good old days.
There you go.
Representative Davnie, Mr. Chairman, did you want the bill to be laid over for possible inclusion?
I do.
All right. Representative Davnie moves that House File 796 be moved for possible inclusion in a later bill. Representative Davnie, to your bill.
Members, over the last decade or more, this legislature has authorized a number of entertainment venues. Actually, we can go back even further than that. A number of entertainment venues in the Twin Cities. Each of those venues has a different governance structure. Each of those venues has a different financing structure. Unfortunately, some of those venues compete against each other. And so we have a situation where taxpayer-subsidized venues are pitted against each other in a competition that only increases the taxpayer subsidy and does nothing for the public benefit. What House File 796 directs the cities of direct the cities of Minneapolis and Saint Paul to establish a joint governance structure for the Target Center in Minneapolis and the Excel Center in Saint Paul, and by January 1st of 2015, and first to report to us by February 1st of 2014 progress towards this, the feasibility of placing the facilities under the Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority, also better known as the Viking Stadium folks, and work with the professional sports teams that are the primary tenants of these two facilities. With me tonight, I have a number of people who could speak to this as needed. Representative Mahoney and I have worked in this policy area for several years, and he is the co-author on the bill, and I appreciate his efforts here.
Thank you, Representative Davnie. This is a public hearing. Are there any members of the public who wish to testify in favor or voice concerns with the bill? Seeing no additional testimony, we'll take questions from members. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Davnie, what do they do in other cities where they have multiple entertainment sports centers such as we do between the two cities?
Representative Davnie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Erickson. I can't answer authoritatively, but anecdotally, my understanding is that in many of our competing markets that have sports venues, those venues are owned by the teams, not by the public. And so there, if you have competition between different venues, you have two private businesses that are duking it out, and they're not receiving the taxpayer subsidies that these two venues are.
Seeing no further questions, any additional comments, closing comments, Representative Davnie?
No, thank you very much.
With that, Representative Davnie renews his motion to have House File 796 laid over for possible inclusion in a later bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, at this time, we have one last bill on the agenda, Representative Loeffler's. She is, I believe, completing a bill in Health and Human Services, Finance. Perhaps, Mr. Chair, if we could stand in recess to the call of the chair. Hopefully it'll be brief.
Did you just want to start the bill, or do you want to recess? It's up to you.
I'd rather allow Representative Loeffler to.
With that, the committee is recessed to the call of the chair.
Thank you very much.